The impacts are evidence across a large portion of the state. It's obvious that the hardest hit areas appear to be southwest Louisiana and Cameron, Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, Allen, Vermilion, and Acadia parishes. So obviously this was a very serious, very large, and powerful storm that produced significant amounts of damage. And before we get there, we already know that there will be damage in southwest Louisiana that will be very difficult to differentiate between what was caused by Hurricane Laura and what was caused by Hurricane Delta. But what we know is that tens of thousands of Louisianans, as we speak, are in a very difficult situation, and we're going to do everything we can, working with our federal and local partners, to make sure that we're addressing their needs just as soon as we possibly can. To that end, the National Guard has more than 3,000 National Guardsmen activated in support of emergency operations. They are already moving commodities to set up points of distribution. They're engaging in route clearance and engineering operations, security, both in terms of our fixed facilities like shelters, but also security in assisting law enforcement, particularly in Calcasieu Parish. They're also running generator missions, and they provided LNOs. And as of this morning, they have 1.5 million meals that they can distribute, 1.5 million bottles of water, about 32,000 tarps, and 48,000 bags of ice. They're currently conducting search and rescue sweeps with 16 aircraft in southwest Louisiana as well. The National Guard has rescued about 10 individuals in Rapides Parish. About 80 individuals across the state have received assistance with rescue, evacuation, or relocation due to urban search and rescue teams. Primarily those are the Fire Marshal's office, but we have teams that came in from other states as well, and some teams that came in from FEMA. The CPRA is reporting that all measures that were put in place in low-lying areas and where the gaps in levee protection systems were in fact successful, and that primarily in St. Mary Parish, Terrebonne Parish, and Grand Isle. CPRA is actively working with Cameron Parish and Grand Isle now to position pumps for dewatering because those areas did take on water, and that water is not yet leaving, so they're going to work to dewater those areas. As of this morning, there were 165 weather-related road closures. So we do encourage everyone, first of all, don't go out sightseeing. It's too early. We're still engaging in search and rescue. We have power restoration crews out and about, other local elected officials and first responders and so forth. So please don't go out sightseeing. But if you must go somewhere, go to 511la.org for real-time updates on road closures and conditions. Thank God, as of right now, we're not reporting any fatalities related to Hurricane Delta. But as we know, just because the storm system itself has passed and exited the state, that doesn't mean the dangers are over. So for example, they're talking about temperatures in southwest Louisiana today in the upper 80s. We know we had some people die of heat-related illnesses. We also know that there was carbon monoxide poisoning when people ran generators, and we're going to get to power outages in just a moment. We had people who were killed by traumatic incidents, whether they were falling off their roofs or they were cutting up trees that fell on them. So everybody needs to exercise a lot of caution, even now, and really especially now. With respect to power outages, oddly enough, because Hurricane Delta was much larger in terms of its wind field, there were more power outages from Delta than there were with Laura. The peak was 688,000 outages across the state of Louisiana. As of noon, that number had decreased to 600,000. And so restoration appears to be progressing more rapidly than was the case after Laura, and that's because the damage to the infrastructure is not as significant. But that's still an awful lot of power outages. Current levels of 25% of all customers in Louisiana are without power as we speak. So we still have an awful lot of work to do with respect to restoring power. The good news is we have about 10,000 utility workers in state right now working on this. If you are using a generator, please be safe, careful, follow the directions, make sure it's at least 20 feet away from your home, out in a well-ventilated area, and not close to a window or a vent, not in a crawl space, certainly not in your home or in a garage. As of this morning, 9,441 Louisianans were in shelters. Of these, 935 were evacuated because of Hurricane Delta. They were in shelters, both parish shelters and in state shelters as well. There are still 8,394 Hurricane Laura evacuees being sheltered, almost all of whom in hotels, and that includes 2,027 that are in Texas. After Hurricane Laura, we continued to receive people who needed shelter for several days after the storm. This could happen now after Hurricane Delta. It will depend on how fast the restoration of electricity occurs. But we do expect that there will be some additional individuals who will need sheltering over the next couple or 3 nights. We're in active discussion with our federal partners to secure all the assistance that we can for the state of Louisiana, including nutrition assistance. And so we're looking for waivers and food assistance for people across the state of Louisiana and in those parishes that were most impacted by the 2 hurricanes. And we're going to have more information on this soon. But for more information about Disaster SNAP, and it hasn't been authorized or turned on for this particular disaster, but you can text LAD-SNAP to 898-211. You'll get more information, and if you're in one of the impacted areas and you want to go ahead and pre-register so that you can get that out of the way in the event that DSNAP is turned on, you can do that. Remember, however, that registration is not an application, and if and when DSNAP is activated, you will still need to apply. Again, you go to LAD-SNAP, text LAD-SNAP to 898-211. We are blessed in a way with good weather over the next several days. It should be dry and should be cooling off as we move forward. We've got a couple of days where the temperatures are going to get into the upper 90s, but this should allow us to get a pretty good start on the recovery from Hurricane Delta, and as you all know, we were still recovering from Hurricane Laura, so the weather should be helpful. I do ask people to continue to be good neighbors to one another, and I know that that's happening out there right now with more volunteers than can be counted. Churches and other religious organizations are out there. People are just being good neighbors to one another, and hopefully we can continue to do that. But I do want to remind people that we are in a COVID environment, so please make sure you do it with all of the mitigation measures in place, including masking or other face coverings. Make sure you're socially distanced to the maximum extent possible, and that you don't engage in these recovery operations in terms of volunteering or so forth if you're sick, and let's make sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable. So with that, we'll take a few questions before we leave here and head to Southwest Louisiana. Yes, sir. Sam?
Governor, do you have a sense for what the biggest, in Laura it was wind that did the most damage? Do you have a sense yet, or was it flooding that's going to be the most problematic with the storm?
Well, it appears, well, first of all, I can't tell you which was the most significant yet, but we know there was more flooding inland with Delta than was the case with Laura. I mean, we've had flooding in Allen Parish and up in Rapides Parish and even points further north than that. We know that the wind damage was significant as well, but it's kind of hard to just take a quick look and know what wind damage was caused by which storm. So we're going to have much more information on this as we move forward. And I'll tell you, this is really important because the way we work with the federal government with respect to documenting storm response and damages, and then for the reimbursement, it depends on which of those, which storm caused what damage. We're trying to work with FEMA to get them to consider to the maximum extent possible, consolidating these two disasters because they occurred in close proximity, both temporal proximity in time, but also in geographic proximity, and it's going to be very, very difficult to differentiate. And so hopefully they will allow us to do that and get to that enhanced reimbursement of at least 90 cents on the dollar federal. And then, of course, we had already had a request in for all Category B and for debris removal to be at 100%, and we're still waiting on that response from the federal government. Yes, ma'am.
Governor, ahead of the storm, we talked about the concern about all the piles of debris in southwest Louisiana because of Laura and the fact that those could become projectiles and do more damage. It doesn't sound like a lot of that happened. Is that the same report you're getting?
Yeah, and of course I haven't had those personal conversations with the number of individuals on the ground that I would need to have a better idea. I will tell you, I did call and spot check. It appears that the vast majority of the debris was always going to be vegetative. That didn't really get picked up and blown around. But where you had construction and demolition debris, so maybe you had a sheet of tin that would catch the wind and blow around, but it doesn't appear to have been the problem that we thought it might be. One thing that's worth mentioning, and this kind of goes to how every storm is unique, and just because you think you know what to expect from previous storms doesn't mean you should ever let your guard down. It seems that in many ways this storm was stronger on the west side than it was on the east side, which is very strange and not something that the Weather Service expected or talked to us about. But in terms of wind speed and in some places where the rain fell, a stronger storm on the west side, even though as it came ashore at 6 p.m. yesterday, the eye was actually collapsing already, and you had dry air feeding into the system from the south, and we know that it went over cooler water just before it made landfall. But the strongest parts of the storm appeared to be on the west side, and that's where you saw much of the debris that did get blown around was actually over in that portion of Lake Charles and west of Lake Charles. Yes, sir.
Did you end up opening the Bastrop shelter or not?
We did, and in fact, the vast majority of people who sheltered last night because of Hurricane Delta sheltered in Bastrop, and that was, I think, well over 800. Any other? Yes, sir.
Any timeline on power restoration? I know you mentioned it might be quicker than.
Yeah, no. So they're still doing the initial damage assessments.